Hey everyone, welcome to Black Gems Unearthed. My name is Jazz and I'm studying Black history of Massachusetts. Today I'm going to share the legacy of Prince Hall, a prolific Black activist of the 1700s. He was the founder of Black Freemasonry, a fraternal order that goes by the name of Prince Hall Freemasonry today. He was a patriot in the American Revolution, and he was an abolitionist that fought tirelessly to change and improve the conditions for Black people in the new forming country. He was a pretty big deal, and more people need to be talking about him. So that is why I'm going to share his story and his activism today. Right now I'm standing outside of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Dorchester, Massachusetts, because this lodge directly descends from the African lodge that Prince Hall founded in the 1770s. If we were to go inside of the lodge, we would see paintings of Prince Hall that are interpretations since there are no known photographs of him. We would see a replica room of the lodge meeting space that he held back in the 1700s, and we would see portraits of some of the distinguished men who have served the fraternal order. So I learned all of this on the Prince Hall Grand Lodge website. I am not a Mason, and if there are Masons listening to this, please come and collect me if I'm saying this wrong. So today there's over 4,500 lodges, which lodges are like chapters, and there's over 300,000 members too that are all affiliated with this mother lodge here in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So let me tell you a bit more about Prince Hall's early life, and then we're going to go on a journey to learn more about Prince Hall around the city of Boston and outside of Boston too. So details on Prince Hall's early life are a bit murky. From what I gathered, he was born in either 1735 or 1738, and he was enslaved to William Hall, a leather worker in Boston. April 9th, 1770, he received manumission papers from William Hall that allowed him to be free of any type of servitude. Now let's go and look at a site in Boston that really influenced the trajectory of Prince Hall's life. Just a month before Prince Hall received his manumission papers and freedom, the Boston Massacre happened right here in Boston. Tensions had rose between the colonists and the British, basically over the British occupation and the taxes and tariffs that Britain continued to place on the colonists. Crispus Attucks, or Attucks, I've heard it pronounced a couple of different ways, he had successfully fled from slavery in Framingham and was working in the Boston area, and he was the first person shot dead in the scuffle. This did not sit well with Prince Hall because Crispus was a Black and a Wampanoag man, and he died over this struggle with the colonists who wanted freedom from the rule of Britain when he himself, Crispus, didn't even own his own freedom. This was not right. This led Prince to go about the colony preaching the need to free all enslaved Black people, to end slavery, and to treat Black people as equals. Nobody was listening to this no-name Black man. So Prince realized that the Freemasons, they wielded the power in the colony. People listened to them. They were influential. Men like John Hancock, Paul Revere. So he decided to try and become a Mason himself. He asked the first lodge, the Freemasonry that was here in the colony, if he could join, and they said, "Ha, yeah, right. No way they're gonna let a Black man join their Freemasonry." Discrimination was very real then. So Prince decided, let me try asking the British Army Lodge instead. Perhaps they would let him become a Mason since they were connected with the Grand Lodge of Ireland. And that's where he had a bit more luck. March 6, 1775, Prince Hall and 14 additional Black men were sworn in to the British Army Lodge 441 to become Freemasons. They were sworn in right here at Castle Island. The worshipful Master John Batt swore them in to become Masons. Their time participating in Lodge 441 was short-lived though, because the siege of Boston took place and the British had to flee in 1776. And so before John Batt fled from the city, he did provide the men with a permit so they could meet as their own lodge, and they could bury their dead in the traditional Freemason form. Prince Hall and the Masons worked very hard to change conditions for Black people in Massachusetts and in the country. They put forth many petitions to change life for Black people. I came across 6 in particular. The first one was a petition from January of 1777, where Prince Hall petitioned the Massachusetts state legislature to free all enslaved Black people. He based his argument on natural rights, as was described in the Declaration of Independence. It would be a few more years before Massachusetts would abolish slavery in 1783, but they ended up abolishing it because they found that slavery was inconsistent with the state's Declaration of Rights that stated that all men were free and equal. So very similar to the argument that Prince Hall was making in 1777. The second petition I came across was Prince Hall petitioning George Washington to let Black people fight in the Revolutionary War. He petitioned George Washington to let Black folks fight and have their freedom after they fought for this new nation. Washington did not agree until the British began recruiting Black folks from the colonies to their side of the war. A third petition that historians believe Prince Hall was involved with was Belinda Sutton's petition for reparations from her 50 years of working for the royal family in Medford and Antigua. I shared more about that in my last video, so I highly recommend going to watch that if you have not yet. A fourth petition I saw that Prince Hall worked on was repatriation back to Africa. In 1787, I believe, he put forth a petition asking that the state of Massachusetts help Black people to relocate back to Africa because the conditions were so poor in the state and there was so much injustice, it would just be better to go back to Africa where there's plenty of resources. I found this interesting because this petition predates the American Colonization Society that was formed to send Black people back to Africa, even though Black people at this point were like, we don't want to go back to Africa, we built this nation. So Prince Hall did actually petition to go back to Africa before there was a society that was focused on doing so. A fifth petition that Prince Hall was involved with was to end the slave trade and to stop the kidnapping of free Black people. It was hard enough to be Black in this new country, just surviving under the regular injustices of work, life, socializing, and so forth. But free Black people were also being kidnapped and sold into slavery. In particular, there was a case where there were Black men by the Boston Harbor, and they were lured onto a ship and they were sold into slavery in the West Indies. So Prince Hall and the Masons put forth a petition to the state and demanded that slave trading and the kidnapping of Black people end. And fortunately, 1788, the state did actually abolish the slave trade and the kidnapping of Africans. Now, the sixth petition had to do with education. Prince Hall found education very important and wanted to ensure that Black children could get an education. And so let's journey to another location and I'll tell you a bit more about that. Prince Hall petitions the Massachusetts state legislature in 1787 to provide education for African American children. I'm outside of the African American Meeting House that was a location for kids to have a school, African American kids, but I'll get to that in a moment. So 1787, Prince Hall petitions the Mass state legislature and they pay him no mind. They do not provide him with the schooling that he's asking for African American children. This leads them in 1796 to petition directly the school board to try and get schooling for African American children. And they too did not pay him any mind. So he takes matters into his own hands and establishes a small school in his home. And eventually that school moves into the home of Primus, who was his son. And eventually from there, the school that was in Primus's home here in Beacon Hill moves to the African Meeting House behind me in 1808. So Prince Hall also really believed in the importance of education and fought for it. Prince Hall was a civil rights hero of the new country. He had a vision for freedom and equality that he fought tirelessly for, and now he rests here in Copp's Hill Burial Ground in North Boston. Every year, the Prince Hall Masons on Memorial Day come here and they celebrate his life with a service. And Cambridge celebrates his life too with a memorial that they have over in the Cambridge Commons. Here in Arlington, Massachusetts, there's a cemetery for Prince Hall Masons. Although now that I'm here and looking around, I don't really see any headstones or indications that people are buried here, so I will have to do some more investigation and get back to you all about who is buried here. Anywho, Prince Hall really did leave quite the legacy, from founding the Black Freemasons to laying the groundwork for African American citizenship and education. If you take a look down in the description, you'll find the sources I used to pull information for this video today, and you could feel free to read and investigate more on your own. Thanks for listening to Black Gems Unearthed.